Hi there, it's Llarold. Today I'm going to talk about something completely different. Diablo 4. I've spent the last several days playing the Diablo 4 beta, and I have some thoughts, so let's just dive right into them. We'll start first with how much we actually got to play of the beta. It's just the first act, and frankly it's more of a demo than a full-fledged beta. Blizzard did this with Diablo 3's beta as well. You only got to play for a handful of hours worth of content. In this case, it is a little bit larger than that. The first full act story playthrough is available, at least I believe that's correct. It's probably about 10 hours start to finish. I did not play it in one single start to finish sitting. I swapped back and forth between characters and got disconnected a bunch of times and, whatever. It is level capped at 25, and it is the first of two tests that Blizzard will be running on this part of the game. The open beta will be next weekend from March 24th to March 27th. Now, I made a deliberate effort to not really get a lot of data or a lot of information going into this. I kind of wanted to go in a little bit blind, and so I didn't know, was this going to be a traditional Diablo experience? Is this a standard ARPG? No, it's not. It feels much more like an MMO than an ARPG. While it still has that traditional ARPG camera style, and it has the Diablo 3 approach of 6 ability buttons, 2 on your mouse and then 4 on your keyboard, or however you choose to bind them. It really doesn't feel comparable to games like Path of Exile or Diablo 2 at all to me. It feels much more like Destiny 2 in terms of the world design and the system design, a lot more like WoW as well. And I only barely played Lost Ark, but it definitely feels a lot like Lost Ark as well. Just to give a couple more examples here, there's an overworld map rather than procedurally generated worlds. When you walk around in an area, you walk west of town, it's the same as everyone else walking west of town. That's just the world that exists. It's like walking through the Barrens in WoW. Because of that, the world map is kind of empty. It really feels quite empty as you're walking through an area in an ARPG to not be like inundated with tons of dense packs of mobs. It's not like running through a rift in Diablo or a map in Path of Exile where mobs might literally be shoulder to shoulder for a quarter mile. You can run for 10, 20, 30 seconds and not see any mobs. Again, more like running through the Barrens. There are mounts to help with traversing the world, but those weren't available in the beta. And I want to say that's probably the first thing I'm going to point out here as a mistake on Blizzard's end. I think something that Lost Ark did really well that I liked was they gave you a mount within the first hour of playing, and I definitely think that's something that Diablo 4 should be doing as well. Obviously, that's probably already set in stone. It just seems like a mistake to me because in the hours that I've played, probably over 20 hours now, I have done a ridiculous amount of walking back and forth, just walking, and that does get kind of tiring at points. Now, in terms of the play experience, when you're just slashing through mobs in one of the dungeons that are scattered throughout the world, it is very familiar for anyone who's played Diablo 3. There is one big change for PC players, though. There's an evade button bound to spacebar. You press it and you jump in the direction that your mouse cursor is relative to your character. This is familiar for someone who's played, I think, the console version. Never played the console version of Diablo 3, but I believe they had this sort of evade, roll button with the sticks or something. And then if you played any Lost Ark, pressing space button to dodge is going to be familiar to you. Now, Blizzard has added a skill tree that offers a similar set of choices to the Diablo 3 skill options. You can choose between one of 4 builders, one of 4 main spender skills, different offensive or defensive cooldowns, or utility skills, things like leap on a barbarian, teleport on a sorcerer, not a wizard this time around, that sort of thing. But in general, it is a customizability that exists within a very limited framework. I would say it's almost more like a reskin of the same skill and rune selection that existed in Diablo 3. There is a bit of Diablo 2 flavor added into this in that you can put up to 5 points into each active skill, and you can get active skill bonuses from gear. And for the most part, these tend to just add damage. In some cases, like a skill like teleport, where you're not using it for the damage, you're using it to move around, it will slightly reduce the cooldown as well. In general, what you want to do is like dump, max all the points you can into an active skill, much like you would have with Diablo 2. If you're playing a Meteor Sorceress, you want to get as many points as you can into Meteor. That's kind of the same situation here in Diablo 4, but it's stripped down quite a bit, really heavily simplified to be, 5 points into that skill. That's kind of your maximum there. And then there are some overlaps in synergy, like if you're playing a Fireball build, you may want to run a Firebolt build because Firebolt will get things burning, and then Fireball will do more damage to a burning character or enemy, but you're not locked into choosing that. You can play Frostbolt and Fireball at the same time. There doesn't really seem to be the incentive that there was in Diablo 2. Like, I didn't run into any fire immune mobs or even any fire resistant mobs, but it is an option if you like the thematic of the concept of being a multi-school spellcaster. In general, it's that same approach of Diablo 3 though. Builder, spender, cooldown, utility, with the addition of ultimate skills. Ultimate skills are basically like what you'd expect from League of Legends or any, the words kind of do it justice. It's a big cooldown that does a lot of damage and then has some utility maybe that interacts with other stuff in your kit. On the Sorceress, I had a couple of utility skills I played around with that I really liked. The Fire one, which summons this big serpent that when you spec further into it will suck mobs into the middle of where the serpent is blasting, and then also make all your fire skills cost no mana, so you can just sit there and spam out fireballs, and that felt pretty good. The lightning one, by comparison, makes it so that for, say, 15 seconds or so, a brief period of time, you summon other random lightning spells whenever you cast any lightning spell. It sounded cool, but it was only using like rank 1 other lightning skills, so they weren't actually doing much damage. It was like a lot of screen clutter and it looked cool, but it didn't really do a lot. It was kind of underwhelming. One big, enormous change here from Diablo 3 is that there don't really appear to be any more maintenance buffs. Like, I played Sorceress all the way up to 25, and I found that, the idea of Tempest Armor or Ice Armor or any of those things that you use and then it's just a passive aura, that's gone. Instead, they're more like active skills, like when you press fire or fire armor, it's more like a divine shield. Like, it makes you immune to damage for 2 seconds, and then it's on like a 20-second cooldown. When you use frost armor, it's more like a 6-second shield, and then it's on a 20-second cooldown. All of the abilities seem to fit into that sort of mold, and the idea of ZDPS support classes from Diablo 3, I think, is completely dead, and I'm actually on board with that. Doing 0 damage and being pure support never really appealed to me, and while there are still support skills, barbs can pick up a chain that pulls mobs in. It's on a pretty long cooldown, like 20 seconds or so. If you take talents that, give, say, like a battle shout type of buff, that for barbs would apply to you for 8 seconds on a 20-second cooldown, and then apply to your allies for 4 seconds on a 20-second cooldown. So, you're not getting this huge utility value, but that's okay because the idea is that you'll bring a lot more damage. And just in general, it seems like the damage tuning is going to be oriented towards not going in that insane runaway scaling that Diablo 3 had, where you were doing literally hundreds of trillions of DPS by the end of Greater Rifting at the max level. It was kind of goofy, and I'm okay with seeing those numbers kind of brought down into more reasonable values. Maybe you'll be hitting hundreds of thousands or millions of DPS. I mean, that doesn't really matter, but obviously seeing hundreds of trillions of DPS was just very silly. There are some serious MMO influences seen here in the class design. I think really just taking directly from World of Warcraft. There are class specializations for each class, and those involve doing a class quest at level 15. The Barbarian one isn't available because it requires you to go to an area that's not in the beta. But for the other two classes that we were able to play, Sorceress and Rogue, or Sorcerer and Rogue, The class quests basically involved running a full dungeon and then getting like a significant playstyle altering buff to your class. In the case of Rogue, it basically gives you combo points. Your generator abilities, your basic skills, generate a combo point, and then your finisher skills, the ones that cost energy, will do substantially increased damage based on the number of combo points that they consume. Not a super complicated thing, but it does change the way you would play from being, like right click 3 times in a row, left click 9 times in a row to like 3 of one of the other, 3 of one of the other. In the case of Sorcerer, it allows you to empower one of your skills, which then makes the rest of your skills change their behavior. If you empower Firebolt, for example, it makes all of your direct damage abilities apply a dot. If you empower Meteor, it makes all of your abilities gives all of your abilities a chance when they kill an enemy to make them explode in a big fireball. That sort of thing. It's not super deep, but it is cool, and there is like a lot of little bits of customization here and there that feel pretty fun. There are also tons of quality of life improvements that Blizzard has drawn from MMOs, like World of Warcraft and even games like Grand Theft Auto. For example, there is a built-in Google Maps line that you can use to like point out exactly where you need to go to path through the terrain of the world to get to, whatever your next objective is. Now let's move on to the graphics. The game looks great. It's very ugly, but in an intentional way. The world is muddy, it's gross. The villages look run down and nasty. The villagers look, decrepit and sad and whatever. The tombs are really like, it's very effective. It reminds me a lot of The Witcher 3, for example, one of the most fully realized game worlds I've ever seen. And I think in general, the art style is great. Blizzard is always really good when it comes to art and design. I think Diablo 3, while I enjoyed it and I like the way that there was a lot of visual clarity in that game with mechanics, people complained a lot about the game looking too light. And I think Blizzard has definitely heard that feedback and chosen to go with something that is much darker, much more lived in and real feeling, and intentionally quite run down and ugly looking. And I think they've totally achieved what they're going for. In terms of the leveling experience, I would say it's incredibly story-driven and atmospheric. I mean, to be honest, it felt like I was playing Metal Gear Solid. Like, every 30 seconds I was stopping to listen to some NPCs talk or to watch another cutscene. And while, that will definitely get annoying on a repeat experience, you are able to skip pretty much all of it. And obviously, it creates a really, deep connection with a feeling of being part of a story, which I think is very appealing to most people. I mean, not to me, I usually skip through everything, but I do like the world and I like the way everything looks and I like the way the characters look, so, it still worked for me. In terms of the story, none of our old favorites are here. Diablo is nowhere to be seen. I think maybe I heard his name said once, but I'm not even sure. Deckard Cain is not here. It is a brand new story using new characters. That may be off-putting to people who really want to see Blizzard play the hits, and, I guess that's a fair criticism, but I think it's worth a try. Diablo 3's story, at least in my opinion, was bad. Just as a refresher, it featured the death of the series' most beloved character in the first act while you were off screen, and the introduction of a new character who, in an Act 3 shocker, turned out to turn into Diablo. The story really wasn't very good, so I think just kind of sweeping all that under the rug and going for something totally new and unrelated is smart. And while the world is a lot more grounded and real and lived in, the story is still about the same kind of cosmic struggle, angels and demons fighting against each other, mortals trapped in between, evil cultists betraying people, and, all those themes are very familiar, even if the characters are not. Now let's talk about the technical performance. I will say, first thing first, it is a beta. Even so, it was bad. The queues on Friday were horrendous. I basically could not play the game until Saturday. I got to log in, do the first few levels, then there was raid testing. After that, I did not get to play at all. I literally didn't play anything after the opening experience until Saturday. The game is extremely choppy. It rubber bands like crazy, and there is tons of lag in towns. FPS is just garbaggio in town. I would say the game is very poorly optimized. Once you're in a dungeon, once you're in some of the more instance content rather than just out in the overworld, the game runs much more smoothly. But the public events, those sorts of things that you're doing out in the overworld with other players, the game runs very poorly. In terms of classes, we're only given access to 3 of the 5 classes in this testing. We will be able to test Druid and Necromancer in next weekend's test, but for now it was just Sorceress, Rogue, and Barbarian. Sorceress was, I think, my favorite of the 3. It was the only one I took all the way up to level 25, at least at the time that I'm recording this. I am probably going to log back in and play a little more after this, but I don't think I'll get the other 2 up to 25. There are 3 specs, 3 main options for Sorceress: Frost, Lightning, or Fire. Frost is iconic. I love Frozen Orb, but I didn't actually find it to be that great. It didn't really do a lot of damage. I loved Lightning from the start. I played Chain Lightning pretty much all the way up to level 25. It's quite enjoyable. It does a lot of damage, and the Chain Lightning jumps really far, like literally off-screens mobs, and that's pretty satisfying. I found Fire to be pretty slow initially, but when I played around with it at level 25, once I had the ultimate ability and had everything fully unlocked, I found that it did enormous amounts of damage. I was able to just like pop that ultimate ability, get my Hydra out, just sit on Fireball and just blast screens full of enemies away, and that felt really good. Rogue was a total surprise for me. I came in with super low expectations. I thought for sure that that would be like the least interesting class in the game. It's sort of a mix of Assassin from Diablo 2, I guess a little bit of Diablo 3's Demon Hunter, and maybe more of Amazon from Diablo 2. At least that was my expectation. It basically has a mix of melee range skills, using like swords and daggers, and then range skills using bows, crossbows, that sort of thing. Total surprise. Absolutely love it. It started out pretty slow for the opening sequence, which takes like 25 minutes or so. You run up to level 5, fully scripted segment. The range damage seemed good initially. I always prefer range damage in this type of game, if balance is relatively similar between the two, because the benefit of being able to hit enemies from 40 yards away is really good. And obviously having to run up into melee range with enemies is not great. However, once I got out into the open world and got to a little bit more levels under my belt, I found that the melee build was ultra powerful. There's a spender that allows you to embed your daggers in an enemy. It costs, I don't remember how much rage, but it shoves the daggers into him, doing some damage, and then after a couple of seconds, the daggers fly to you and hit everything along the way for a massive amount of damage. They also hit the enemy that you've embedded the daggers into. What this basically meant in terms of playstyle is you could use this Shadow Step that rogues have and Dash that rogues have, 2 different melee skills that you can use in tandem with each other, to embed several daggers in an enemy, and then dash across a screen or several screens away, and have those daggers come flying to you and basically just clear out everything in a giant line. Despite the fact that they're, daggers or swords or whatever, the line is quite a bit wider than I expected it to be, and this was just wonderful, wonderful fun, really good experience being able to just slam through like whole screens full of enemies by doing that. Fun little combo, basically. It was super high mobility. It was surprisingly tanky. I was blown away by how tanky this class was, considering, it's sort of supposed to be like this lightweight, flimsy, fast-moving, stabby guy. It was really, really good tankiness. And I absolutely loved it. Like, I might actually wind up maining this when the game goes live initially. Like, I was totally taken by surprise. The final class is Barbarian. There's no way around it. Barbarian sucks early. It starts speeding up once you get into the level 12 to 15 range, and it really does start to slam pretty hard at that point. I found it a lot of fun once I got up into the mid levels of our testing range, 1 to 25. Right about that midpoint is when it finally became fun to play. In general, it's the same basic playstyle that you've always expected from Diablo 3 Barbarian, which is builder, spender, and then just all the rage generators you can get. Barb's always kind of operating at a disadvantage compared to the other classes. They're running around with a full energy pool or a full mana pool, and then they see some enemies, they use their spenders to blast everything away, and then they've bursted it away and it's gone. Barb has to walk in and auto attack to build up their rage. That's a humongous disadvantage. So being able to, at level 15, leap in, generate 40 energy or 40 rage just by leaping into melee range, and then immediately hit an enemy with a very hard hitting spender is way more satisfying, way better gameplay experience than the starting, first 15 levels or so. Whirlwind is super popular. I think there are some pretty cool legendaries or maybe some sort of later bonus that I haven't gotten to that causes them to spawn tons of whirlwinds, but I have seen plenty of barbarians running around just whirlwinding all over the place. And it seems like you're able to maintain pretty high uptime once you get to a higher level. In the mid-range, I really liked the Rend builds. Just Bleed Barb in general does a lot of damage and is super efficient with rage. That was kind of the main issue I had early on with it, is you feel like you basically can never use your spenders. When you get to, they hit really hard. But, it's just basically auto-attacking for hours. Very, very bleh initially, but it gets good once you get going. All right, now I want to talk about something that maybe I could make into its own video, but I really would rather just kind of keep this all condensed into one. Path of Exile, and why I haven't really mentioned it as something that Diablo 4 is in competition with at all. I don't think it is. I have 5 reasons here for why I think that is, and so I'm just going to run through them now. First off, complexity. Diablo 4 does not have it. In terms of skills alone, Path of Exile has hundreds of skills and hundreds of support gems, and then 7 base classes with 3 specializations for 6 of them, and quite a bit more for the 7th. And that means that the possible permutations of character setups is probably in the trillions or quadrillions or quintillions. There are more possible Path of Exile builds than there are stars in the universe. By comparison, Diablo 4 has about 20 to 25 skills for each class, 2 possible specializations of each skill, and a handful of legendary bonuses that can affect each skill. Probably. I haven't seen them all. That's cool, and it makes the game way more approachable for casual players, which appeals to a wide mass audience. It also just makes the game less deep than Path of Exile. There's also the crafting system in Diablo 4, which at this point basically just seems to be an upgrade system. It works like this. You find a good piece of gear on the ground, you get some gold and some mats that you've gathered by disenchanting bad gear, and you upgrade the item. It makes the stats, more. If it's a weapon, it has higher DPS. If it's a piece of armor, it has more armor. The end. Path of Exile's gear crafting system, by comparison, is the most complicated thing I've ever seen in my life. I have over 10,000 hours of Path of Exile experience, quite a lot more, and I still feel like I'm learning something new every time I try to craft a piece of gear. I feel like I'm the Always Sunny meme with Charlie having a breakdown in the mailroom. Next up is endgame. At this point, we literally don't know anything about Diablo's endgame. They've said they're super excited to reveal more later, but to me that reads as code for we don't know. What we know that there is of endgame in this beta is things like public world quests, public events, dungeons that you can run through that have, a handful of RNG bosses at the end, but the same basic cadence. You kill a bunch of guys in it, then you get sent to 3 different mini fetch quests in different wings of the dungeon. You bring all the boxes or whatever to the room in the middle. That opens up the boss room. You kill the boss. The end. That's kind of it thus far. By comparison, Path of Exile has an extremely well-defined endgame with several different parallel progression paths and an absolutely massive variety of content options available to players with the freedom to create a handmade in-game experience based on what you like and what you don't like and don't want to do. This is a real reversal of fortune for Blizzard. In the MMO genre, World of Warcraft has, for over 15 years now, been the game that crushed all the new games in the genre, because WoW had an established in-game, and the new games didn't. So any new game that would come into the genre and try to compete with WoW would ultimately get squeezed out by WoW's established raiding and dungeon and PvP endgame. I think this is the main reason that Blizzard has made such a hard pivot away from this game falling into the traditional ARPG genre, if I had to pin it down to a single thing. Grinding Gear Games has had an absolute stranglehold on how to make ARPGs in games. They have a 10-year head start on Blizzard now, which is crazy to say out loud, and there's just no way that Blizzard can ever make up that difference if they try to fight in the same arena. Next up is gearing and items. Items in Diablo 4 are represented through a power number on the item. If the number is bigger, the item is probably better. While there are some affixes on items, the stats they give are mostly very small. 1% crit, 1% cooldown reduction, 2% more healing received, that sort of thing. Path of Exile, by comparison, is a game that is defined by its items. Items are the source of all of your strength as a character, and the difference between bad items and good items isn't doing 100% more damage, or like 3% more damage as it seems to be thus far in Diablo 4. It's doing 10 million% more damage. This is why Path of Exile has so much more depth and staying power, but it's also why it is so much more unapproachable for a newer or more casual player. It's a game that requires you to be a hardcore no-lifer to appreciate it to the fullest. Next up is content frequency. Blizzard did an absolutely horrendous job of maintaining Diablo 3. They put out Reaper of Souls after a while, but then they forgot about the game for over a year before they started making seasons. That is something that should have been in the original pre-Reaper of Souls Diablo 3 from day one. They had over a decade of maintaining Diablo 2's ladder system. They knew they needed to do this, and they knew how. It's not complex. It was a massive failure on Blizzard's part to put out a game and not have a strategy for renewing the game and giving reasons for players to come back every few months and experience some of the same old content, but also new content. When they finally did come up with the idea for seasons for Diablo 3, they didn't have the seemingly obvious idea to actually add new content or themes or make serious balance changes to classes for literally years. I played the same Diablo 3 season after season for years. Blizzard has said that they're not going to do that this time around with Diablo 4, and I want to believe them. I hope that that is the case. They've said they have a plan for making sure the game stays fresh. But they've also said that seasons aren't going to be a thing, or ladders aren't going to be a thing from day one, that they'll happen eventually. They haven't really given any details other than, we'll make sure to keep the game up to date. That's not great given their track record. Again, by comparison, Path of Exile releases a new season every 3 months, like clockwork. Each new season features massive new content, major skill reworks, new unique items, and about every 6 months to a year, they completely rework the endgame, implementing a massive collection of new bosses, new experiences to have in the game, and it feels like a brand new Path of Exile. Again, about every 6 months to a year, with the guarantee that they're going to put out a new season every 3 months. You know when you're coming back to the game. As soon as you stop playing it, you know when you're coming back. I don't feel that way with Diablo 3, and I don't know of a guaranteed roadmap towards feeling like that with Diablo 4. That is a problem. And finally, bosses. Path of Exile's in-game bosses are some of the most impressive, complex encounters I've ever experienced. I say this as a high-end raider in WoW. I am consistently blown away by the level of mechanical complexity that Grinding Gear Games is able to put into Path of Exile's bosses. They are tough, they are complex, and they are super satisfying to kill. I love them. We've only gotten the first taste of Diablo 4's boss encounters, but it's been pretty underwhelming so far. Now I bear in mind, and I am fully willing to admit if I am proven wrong once June rolls around and we get to see the in-game bosses and they blow away these early mid-game bosses. But the bosses that we've seen at the end of dungeons are about 5 to 6 or so interchangeable, randomly selected big baddies with a skill set of about 2 to 4 abilities. They have enormous health pools and they take a really long time to kill, but they're not like unique individual figures. You can fight the Blood Deacon in the end of one dungeon or a different one. You can run into him out at a world event. You can run into the Chosen of Lilith out at a world event or at the end of a dungeon. In terms of the boss fights themselves, they pretty much amount to dodging projectiles they throw at you, dodging swirly circles near the boss, or moving out of swirly circles on the ground. They are well communicated visually. I think the visual clarity is good. Definitely something that Path of Exile has failed on. So I want to give Blizzard credit for that. But the complexity of the bosses is generally pretty low. Now again, I think that's good when it comes to making this game appealing to a mass audience. Simple bosses that aren't difficult but are fairly rewarding makes for a great, fun experience you can pick up and play with your friends, and that's good. It's fun, but it doesn't leave an indelible memory etched into the pathways of your mind. I still remember the first time I killed Uber Shaper. I had no portals left, no health flask charges, and my heart was pumping so hard I thought it was going to explode. It was a great experience, and it was memorable. But it was also something that I fought my way up to earning and eventually conquering through dozens and dozens of hours of time put into the game. It wasn't something that I could just pick up and play. So just to wrap up this section, I don't really think Diablo 4 and Path of Exile are going to be direct competitors going forward. And I think that's a smart move by Blizzard. I'm actually pretty happy about it, to be honest. So just to wrap things up, Diablo 4 looks like it's going to be a really fun game with tons of mass appeal. Blizzard has rightly recognized that they can't just remake Diablo 3 with better graphics and a few new skills, and they've shifted to making an entirely new type of game. I think this is going to draw in a much wider audience than Diablo 3 did. I have some serious concerns about the lack of an announced end game and the depth of the game in general. I think the lack of depth in the game will probably make this a game I play less seriously and more seasonally, playing in bursts when new patches land and new ladders start, but less of an all the time, every single day for months at a time hardcore approach that I take with Path of Exile. That being said, I do think that Diablo 4 is going to absolutely obliterate sales records. I think this game is going to be super, super successful, and I am very excited to play more of it. And on that note, the next round of beta testing starts next Friday, March 24th at 9 a.m. PST and runs through 9 a.m. PST on Monday, March 27th. So you should try it out. It is an open beta, so you don't have to spend any money or anything to get access to it. And I think it's worth your time. It's pretty fun. Finally, this was obviously a very different type of video for us compared to our usual fare. If you liked it, or if you didn't, please let us know in the comments section so we can either do more or less of this kind of thing in the future. If I had the camera on, this would be the point where I look into the camera. I'm telling you, seriously, your feedback will literally affect my behavior, so just let us know. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.